Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Dr. Cindy Elliser. I'm the Associate Director of the Salish Sea Institute, and I will be your host and MC for the event. I want to start off by acknowledging that I am speaking from Anacortes, Washington, on the ancestral homelands of the Samish Indian Nation, and the Salish Sea Institute is housed at the Western Washington University's main campus that is situated on the ancestral homelands of the Lummi Nation and Nooksack tribe. Many of us on this call are on the ancestral homelands of the Coast Salish peoples who have lived in the Salish Sea basin all throughout the San Juan Islands and the North Cascades watershed from time immemorial. We express our deepest respect and gratitude to our Indigenous neighbors for their enduring care and protection of our shared lands and waterways. Just going to check something real quick. On behalf of the Salish Sea Institute, Orca Salmon Alliance, and the WW Alumni Office, I am excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Orca Month, Orcas Can't Vote, but You Can. This webinar is part of Orca Month, which is celebrated every June. Orca Month was started by Orca Network and is now coordinated by the Orca Salmon Alliance and was created to bring together researchers, advocates, and a growing community of orca lovers to raise awareness about the threats facing southern resident orcas. Now in its 20th year, Orca Month has spread from Washington to Oregon and British Columbia and includes educational and celebratory events throughout the month of June. Please be sure to check out the website orcamonth.org, and Cindy Hansen will put that in the chat for you guys to find events near you. The Salish Sea Institute collaborates with regional, just to tell you a little bit about the Institute, we collaborate with regional universities, government agencies, Indigenous communities, and nonprofit organizations to conduct scientific research, develop sustainable management strategies, and educate the public about the environmental, social, and economic importance of the Salish Sea. We focus on the transboundary nature of the Salish Sea and how we all need to work together across borders and disciplines to protect these shared waters. An important part of that work is collaboration, like this webinar, being brought to you by the Salish Sea Institute, Orca Salmon Alliance, and the WW Alumni Office, to help share information with anyone that is interested in helping Southern residents and the Salish Sea. Today, we are excited to share with you a wonderful group of experts and advocates who will discuss important state and federal legislation impacting Southern resident orcas, the importance of voting, and how you can get involved from the local to federal level. Our first speaker is Dr. Michael Weiss, the Research Director of the Center for Whale Research, who will provide an overview of the Southern resident killer whale population. Then we will hear from Tara Galuska, Washington State's Orca Recovery Coordinator, about policies at the state level, followed by Jeremy Lucas, a field rep for the state of Washington, about policies at the federal level. We will round out the panelists with Abby Dock, Advocacy and Policy Coordinator for Save Our Wild Salmon, who will speak to the importance of voting and how you can make a difference for killer whale populations. Now, a bit of housekeeping before we dive in. Some of you have submitted questions with your registration, and we appreciate those. We have tried to incorporate those questions in our discussion topics today. However, we have limited time, so not every question that was submitted will be covered. As we move through our discussion today, please use the Zoom Q&A feature, which should be at the bottom middle of your screen, to send us any questions that may come to mind, and we will try and get to some of those as well during our panel discussion at the end. So we're going to get into our presentations and hopefully have a little bit of time at the end to have some Q&A and answer some questions. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Michael Weiss to tell us about the Southern residents.
Hi, thank you so much. Really happy to be here to chat with you all a bit. So I'm Michael Weiss. I'm the research director at the Center for Whale Research. We've been, as an organization, studying Southern residents we're in our 50th year now of Orca Survey. Orca Survey is the annual photo ID census of this population. So we identify every single individual in the population every year. That helps us do a lot of interesting science around tracking family structure, demography, and then also crucially is the data that goes on to NOAA fisheries and other government groups to actually track the status of the population. So I'm going to give a really quick overview of where the population stood as of our last July 1st census. Our census is always the census of the population as of July 1st, because we don't tend to be able to get every individual right on that date. It usually takes us until September to actually know what that July 1st number was. And obviously we don't know it now because that hasn't happened yet, but I'll share kind of the previous census and then what's happened since and where we stand right now. So I'm going to try to share my screen real quick. Is that all showing up for everybody okay?
Yep, looks good.
Great. So this is the census count for the population over the entire study period from 76 onwards. On the top, you have the total population size of the Southern residents, and then you have the three main social groups, the three pods, J, K, and L, in separate colors below. Um, the main thing to see is, in 2025, we kind of continued this trend of this plateau in the low 70s in terms of total individuals in the population. But that plateau is really only being maintained by JPod having a steady, well, not steady, but a bit of an increase over the last few years, while the other two pods are either plateaued or, in the case of KPod, declining pretty quickly. They're now just at their lowest level since the 80s. If they lose any more individuals, they could dip well below their historical levels. So these are the numbers as of July 1st each year. Since July 1st of 2025, um, we've and just as a sorry, just to put that into perspective, one of the delisting criteria under the kind of species recovery plan for this population is sustained growth of about 2.3% over generation time, which is over 20 years. And so that red line there is that goal. And then these data points are where we've actually reached annually and then a little smooth over it. So we're really still not reaching, even with some population growth last year, we are not reaching the recovery goals, even on a year-to-year basis, let alone on a sustained basis. Since that census, we've had a few other demographic events. In September, unfortunately, J36, young female in the population, showed up with a deceased neonate that she pushed around for a day. It was a female calf, seemed to be full term. We knew J36 was pregnant from our observations and our colleagues. And unfortunately, yeah, this calf did not make it. We don't know if this calf was born alive and then died very young or was stillborn by the time we or anybody else saw it. It was already deceased. Not too long after that, this whale, J36's sister, J42, had her own calf. Um, this calf was first seen by the Sea Society down in Saratoga Passage. Unfortunately, again, by October of last year, this calf J64 was also no longer with the pod and deceased. We don't know anything about cause of death, but we really just had a few encounters with this calf, and then it disappeared. Um, in November, our team was down in Puget Sound conducting a study on behavior and acoustics, doing drone work and having hydrophones in the water. But while we were down there, we were lucky enough to have a Southern Resident Superpod, which let us confirm that at least as of November, everyone else in the Southern Resident community, obviously excluding J64 there, was still present as of November. So all 74 of those whales that were in that July 1st census, we were able to document either through photos or from the drone in Puget Sound in November. And this is just a little bit of footage from that Superpod day we had. Um, then the next calf that showed up was K47. That's the newest calf in K-Pod. We are still trying to figure out who K47 belongs to. K47 has been photographed alongside K36, as well as K43, both of whom would be first-time moms. Based on kind of qualitative, let's say, looks at our drone footage, I'm leaning more towards K43 as a likely mom than K36, but we haven't had many opportunities to keep observing the calf's behavior. We're hoping the next time we see K-Pod, it'll be kind of more glued to one of those two females, and we can definitively say who mom is. We did get receive some video taken by a fisherman off California in March of K-Pod, and K-47 did still appear to be in the group. So as far as we know, K-47 is still around. Another calf that showed up since the census is L129. We really just have one encounter with this calf, swimming both with L55, who we suspect is actually post-reproductive, probably not still of reproductive age, as well as L55's daughter, L103, who we think is more likely mom. We're not totally sure about the status of this calf, depending on how old it is. If it was very fresh, its body condition is probably normal. If it is at all if it is at all kind of, older, then we are a little bit concerned about its body condition. It might be a little skinny. We're hoping that L129 is still with L-Pod when we next see them. But again, like K-Pod, it's been many months now since we've had a chance to get a good census of either of those pods. However, through the first half of this year, we've had a pretty consistent presence of J-Pod right up until last month, where they disappeared. But pretty consistent presence of J-Pod in the Salish Sea, which has let us confirm that all of J-Pod was present during those encounters, including the two newest kids, so J62 and J63. Were both present and appeared healthy. So J-Pod, we've got a pretty good handle on. We think everybody's still there. We haven't seen any new calves since J64, but the other two pods we don't know. So because of that, we don't have a current number. We don't keep a running tally because while we do have these new calves, we first of all don't know if those new calves are still around. We also don't know if we've lost anybody. So it's not as simple as just taking the July 1st number and adding and subtracting what we know. We really have to do our full census into September, look back at all our data, and figure out what the most likely population size for July 1st was. And that's as much as we know right now. I hope I didn't go too over time there.
No, that's great. Thank you so much, Michael. It's disheartening, obviously, to see the little ones not making it, but there are some that are making it. So it's kind of a mixed bag. We always go with that hope, right? That there's some that are doing well.
Yeah.
And hopefully more.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. So we'll move on now to Tara, who can help us learn more about the policies at the state level and what's being done here in Washington.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to share my screen. I have a PowerPoint for you. Can you see that?
Yes.
Great. Well, I'm Tara Galeska, and I am the Orca Recovery Coordinator in the Governor's Salmon Recovery Office, which sits in the Recreation and Conservation Office, a Washington state agency. I'm going to talk. I'm so pleased to see so many people here and wanting to engage and be involved in Southern resident orca recovery, and really, I'm sure, caring and being passionate about these whales. It's just they're just incredibly beautiful, and as we know, they're a species in grave peril of extinction. So the more we can do, the better, and the more hands on deck we have, the better. So appreciate everyone's interest. You may know some of this already that I'll talk about, but I did want to cover just a little bit about legislative process, because this is about action and voting and, moving the needle for these animals. So I'm going to talk about legislative process, and I'll go over some key state legislation passed. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Orca Task Force, which former Governor Jay Inslee put together, and what that meant. So as you know, likely there's three branches of government. There's the governor's executive branch. There's the judicial branch, where lawsuits happen and legal work. And then there's the legislative branch, where laws are passed. And I really wanted to put this slide up, and I'm going to share this presentation with Cindy. If she would like to send it out to folks, that's great, or you can reach out directly to me. But everybody should know who their legislators are, who their representatives are, and who their senators are that represent them from their districts, so that you know who to reach out to. These, as state agency representatives, we are not allowed to advocate. And so constituents are you all are very important pieces of the puzzle of getting work done and getting laws passed and getting your voice heard. And these are the folks that you reach out to get your voice heard. Just a quick slide on natural resource state agencies. These are all of the different state agencies that touch southern resident orca recovery. And I would also add the Department of Health to that group, because they're working on human health. And as we know, we're all connected to our environment, and ecosystem health is important for human health. And I just show this to you so that you know where some of the work is happening on the legislation that I show you. We carry out direction from the legislature. So when the legislature passes laws or bills are passed, a lot of times we will be carrying out that work among the different agencies. We also submit budgets to the Office of Financial Management. Just yesterday, the Office of Financial Management in the governor's office sent out budget directions to all of these state agencies. And that's done every 2 years on the legislative biennial process. And we have to submit budgets to OFM by September. Those get reviewed. Those go to the governor's office. Then the governor puts out a budget. The governor's budget then goes to the legislature and to react to, and then the House will put out a budget, and then the Senate will put out a budget, and those become budget bills, and those are passed on the floor just like any other law. So budget bills are actually passed out on the floor of the legislature. So that's just a little bit in a nutshell how that process works. Just going back to here, so here's where laws happen, and the legislature, the executive branch of the government, the governor's office, can do executive orders. You may have heard a lot about this. Is similar in the presidential office. You may have heard a lot about the executive orders that President Trump is putting out. Well, similarly, our governors can put out executive orders at the state level. And back in 2018, Governor Inslee put out an executive order on creating a Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force. This was incredible. An executive order is a formal signed, written, published directive from the governor to his cabinet agencies that are under the governor's control. So not elected leaders, not like the Commissioner of Public Lands at the Department of Natural Resources, but his cabinet agencies. And it directs agencies to take certain action. And the reason this was really amazing is because not very many executive orders are put out typically by a governor, and certainly not very many executive orders around natural resources. So this was a big deal, and it was a really momentous time for action for Southern resident killer whales. An executive order outlines a problem, elevates an issue, and identifies immediate actions for state agencies to take. This particular executive order created the Southern Resident Killer Whale Task Force to develop 49 recommendations. This is just huge high-level overview. I know most of you know this, but why are southern resident orca declining? There's too much noise in the water, too much pollution, and too few fish. And the governor said, hey, we can't just rely on NGOs. We can't just rely on the federal government. We as a state can do something, and we should do something. There's also the issues of climate change, population growth, and scientifically proven inbreeding as of late. So that task force was made up of lots of NGOs, maybe some folks on this call, I'm not sure, tribes, legislators, agencies. It met over 2 years with extensive public comments and came out with these 49 recommendations. The reason I'm kind of going into all of this detail is a lot of legislation came from this task force and a lot of funding in those budget bills. And so those recommendations, you can find this on the Orca website that we have for the state, and I'll put that up on a slide in a minute. I mentioned bills that get passed. This is the level of funding that came after the task force in the biennial budget, the every 2-year budget that passes, and this was distributed amongst many state agencies to give orca recovery a big boost. Some of these were existing programs. Some of them were new policy initiatives, which I'll show you in a minute. I went over the budget process, but I also wanted to mention how a bill becomes a law. A bill needs a sponsor, so a legislator. that can come from their own ideas. The governor's office can have some ideas. The constituents like you can bring ideas to your legislatures on a bill. So then bills are introduced in a chamber. They go to a policy committee for discussion. Then they go to a fiscal committee to look at the fiscal component of a bill, then a rule committee, and then they go to a floor vote. Now, they can be not passed at any one of these levels. And in these different committees, bills will have hearings. And that's where you all come in, and you all as constituents can sign in positive, negative, or can actually provide a public comment at a hearing. They happen during the day, so you have to be available. And this is what lobbyists do. They come to these hearings and they give a voice to a certain sector of society. But individuals are always welcome to and encouraged to be a part of this process. If the bill goes to the floor vote and it passes both chambers, the Senate and the representatives, then it goes to the governor for signature, and then the bill becomes a law. And that's a link on information and videos on how that this process works. I mentioned earlier that the governor's office, OFM, the Office of Financial Management, just came out with their budget instructions just yesterday. And that's public information. There's a letter written to all the agencies from the Office of Financial Management. And they also publish these priorities for budget development. Now, Governor Ferguson, he's been around. He was our former Attorney General. He's our current governor. And we were very pleased to see that he added climate and environment to protect and sustain Washington's environmental, cultural, and natural resources. That line was very important to be included in his priorities for budget development. That's good news. The bad news is it is not a awesome year fiscally. And, there will be significant shortfalls in both the operating and capital budgets. And that is due to the past decade. There's been a 39% increase in inflation. So what cost $100 in 2016 now costs $139. And I know all of us are feeling that in our pockets. And so because of inflation, the increase in cost of essential services, cuts in federal funding, population growth, court decisions, and other uncertainties, it's not looking like a great budget year. And why I bring that up is because you need to have decent numbers in order to do large policy initiatives. So what happens when there's not a great budget year is we typically don't see bills passed that have a massive fiscal note or fiscal financial impact on the state. In other words, something that would cost a lot of money to do. So that's what happens in these kinds of years typically. And we'll see that play out in this next legislative session, likely. And I can take questions at the end, but I'm going to go. I know I'm going rather quickly because I don't have a lot of time, but I did want to talk about what's happened since the task force. I have slides on each of the threat areas. On the vessels, I'm just going to you can have a copy of this and look at all of these bills yourselves. But I would say a couple of the big ones that happened is basically the whale watch industry became regulated. And then the legislature directed Department of Fish and Wildlife to do adaptive management reports on reducing vessel noise and how that bill particularly was going. New science came into play in this from NOAA, which really demonstrated that boats were disturbing killer whales at a certain distance. And so out of that adaptive management report and recommendations to the legislature, Senate Bill 5371, which is the 1,000-yard distance law, passed. So there's many avenues to doing bills. And this is an example of one which we were directed as the Department of Fish and Wildlife was directed as a state agency to do this report, to include new science. This was an adaptive process. They shared the new science with the legislature, and a couple of legislators picked up on that and ran a bill. And that bill did pass. And there was several bills on oil spill planning and safety and responsibility. Policy initiatives can also come not in the form of a bill, but in the form of a budget proviso. And that is how the organization Quiet Sound was formed, which main mission is to reduce noise in waters for the protection of southern resident killer whales. So that happened in a budget bill. So that's an interesting distinction. On the legislative front, quite a few bills occurred. There was a derelict vessel removal bill, which is removing, toxic vessels out of the water that are derelict. A couple of permit streamlining bills. There was a kelp and eelgrass conservation bill. And so there was a least impactful shoreline armoring bill. So if you were going to put shoreline armoring up, you have to look at the least impactful way to do that. So soft armoring instead of hard banks. So those are some examples of some of the some legislation that has passed. And I have to say, it is not easy to get legislation typically passed. There's partisan issues, and so it does go through a really lengthy process. So it's really amazing to see so much work that has come out of the task force recommendations. And then contaminants, that I went over that quickly, but toxics in the water through stormwater, through typically a lot through stormwater and legacy chemicals. We have a lot of pollutants in our waters, and that is really hurting the reproductive ability and the survivability of the calves. So we're doing, we need to do as much as possible to reduce toxics, basically. And a couple of a really cool program that came out of this is the Safer Products Washington, and it's reducing chemicals in cosmetics was one bill. Another one was reducing plastic pollution. So if you're in a hotel and you see those little microplastic bottles of shampoo, those are being phased out in Washington state and will be illegal soon for hotels of a certain size. And so you're seeing those bigger dispensers. So we're just, as a state, doing what we can to reduce plastic pollution. Department of Ecology, it's not on my slide here, but they're currently working on a microplastics strategy. And I've learned so much about microplastics in the environment, in the ocean, and how they are impacting human health, not only human health, but marine mammals as well. And it's just scary stuff. The most recent legislative session that occurred, one bill that passed was the sewage spills transparency. So now now we're made aware when and where there's a sewage spill within a certain time frame. And then the requirement of PFAS sampling required in biosolids. PFAS is a bad chemical, a chemical of emerging concern that's been identified. There's a whole slew of work on chemicals of emerging concern. They're called CECs through the Department of Ecology in terms of trying to reduce those. Other important key things that happened were the Climate Commitment Act. That was sort of simultaneously and happening even before the task force, but I put it on here because it's had such a huge impact financially on and really helped some of this work happen. It came from the cap and trade program out of the Climate Commitment Act. It actually funded a lot of the work for salmon recovery that we've had in the last couple of legislative sessions. I've mentioned some of this. We have a toxics in fish implementation strategy now as a result of some of this work. And we've put additional funding into Puget Sound toxic cleanup and stormwater retrofits to try to reduce the chemical stormwater load that goes into Puget Sound. Never enough money to do this work, always needs to be increased, we always need to do more on this. This is an example of once a bill goes off the floor and it goes to the governor's office for signing. And this is when the distance law was signed by Governor Jay Inslee. And this was pretty exciting. And if any of you are tracking, Canada also just put out an interim order to do 1,000-meter setback in British Columbia waters. And so now we have a regional buffer around southern resident killer whales from boats, and we hope that gives them more opportunity to find their food, communicate, and breed with less disturbance. So that's really exciting. Other issues that are going on right now, Oregon just listed southern resident killer whales as a state listed species. These are federally listed as endangered on the Federal Endangered Species Act law, but there's also state processes to list at the state level. So Oregon now is working on management plans for southern resident killer whales. They travel all the way down to California. And now California has been petitioned by nonprofit organizations to also list southern resident killer whales on their state endangered species list. And that hearing through the California Department of Fish and Game Commission is happening, I think, June 16th or 17th. If people are interested in seeing how that process works, I think that would be a really interesting thing to watch. And so we're hoping to have, a real regional approach to recovery. And I think, Washington sort of lagged behind on doing some, on boosting recovery work. And now I feel like we've been a leader and a model. And it's really exciting to be able to work with other states and with Canada as well in a really positive, impactful way. Looking ahead for 27-29, I kind of gave you the sad budget news that we will be in. But legislation that I'll be looking at is the possible reintroduction of the passenger-only ferry bill, possible reintroduction of a ship scrubber bill, which is basically moving a air quality problem into a water quality problem, scrubbing air pollution and putting it in the water. And then, of course, we're implementing, always in the process of implementing our statewide salmon strategy, and that's a whole other talk. I did want to, since you might want resources on how to get involved, to let you know about the Orca website. There's a partner page. There's resources for teachers. I put progress on the task force recommendations on there. There's a what you can do page. I also am sharing this resource, How a Bill Becomes a Law in Washington State, through the TVW. They have a series of videos. If you want to get involved in the legislative process, one thing, and I didn't put it on the slide, but I'm going to say it real quick in my half minute left, is tune in to the Puget Sound Partnership staff person. Their legislative director, Don Gorley, does an amazing job of capturing all the legislative bills that are moving through the process. And he does it every Friday at noon during a legislative session. He does an amazing job. He puts all of the information on the Puget Sound Partnership's website so you can follow along, track, learn, and know when hearings are happening. He's just been an amazing resource, and I can't say enough about it. And that, I think, is all I have time for. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Tara. It's wonderful. I love hearing the cross-border, whether we're talking about Canada and the US or states, like this is all one ocean, it's all one area, and we should all be working together. And it's wonderful to see things going in that direction. So thank you so much for that update. All right, so that actually goes well. And moving on into the federal sphere, because as we all know, we have our, there's the cities, there's states, there's the federal level. And so we have Jamie Lucas is going to talk to us about that. And I will take a moment to mention that for the panelists, if you are able to, you can look at the Q&A, just in case we don't have time for some of those answers to those questions at the end. You can take a look and you can type in answers if you have any at the time. So I will leave it to Jamie now. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Give me just a second to get set up here. All right. Can you see my screen?
Yes, looks great.
Awesome. All right. So my name is Jeremy Lucas. I am the Washington State Field Rep at Oceana. And today I'll be talking about some of the federal policy and activity that we're keeping an eye on and actively participating in that would be related to southern resident orcas. So just a little bit about Oceana. Oceana is the world's largest NGO solely dedicated to ocean conservation. Our global HQ is in Washington, D.C. I'm lucky enough to work in the other Washington from my house, so been really lucky with that. But just to kind of map out where we work, we have country offices in a variety of different countries around the globe. We tend to like settling in capitals for purposes of lobbying and that sort of thing. Our newest office is actually in Accra, Ghana, so we're really excited to have them come online. So just a little bit about our agenda, and this will be really high level stuff given the time constraint. But if anyone does have questions or wants to chat more, I'll have my email posted at the end of this presentation. But we'll be talking a little bit about the latest and greatest with NOAA funding, proposed changes to the Office of Protected Resources, updates to the Endangered Species Act and the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and the Pacific Salmon Recovery Fund. So let's talk a little bit about the NOAA budget. So NOAA, or the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, is that federal agency that really kind of oversees all things related to weather, climate, fisheries, protecting certain marine species that are listed as endangered, that kind of thing. So when we talk about the NOAA budget, what we're looking at is a significant decrease across the board. So all up, the administration is requesting a 26% decrease in the NOAA budget for FY 2027 when compared to their operating budget of FY 2026. Within that, NIMS, or you'll sometimes hear it referred to as NOAA Fisheries. It actually is the Office of the National Marine Fisheries Service. It's an office within NOAA. Their budget proposal from the administration is looking at a 41% decrease compared to their FY 2026 operating budget. This would definitely put a strain on what they can do, and make them ask some really tough questions of what they can't do. And an example of something that we Oceana are working on and actively monitoring is that due to a lack of resources, the Pacific Fishery Management Council is recommending that the agency remove over 40 of its active federally managed ground fish stocks from being overfished, simply because NOAA doesn't have the resources to manage every single fishery. And most likely those would either be pushed to the states to manage, which they don't have the capacity for either, or they would be moved into a category which is called ecosystem component. But all up, these budget cuts would impact the agency's ability to forecast weather. So the National Weather Service is within NOAA. Monitor our climate, regulate fisheries, like I already said, and protect threatened and endangered species, which leads us to NOAA's Office of Protected Resources. The Office of Protected Resources within NOAA is that office that protects various species that require protection. So good example of that is anything listed as endangered or threatened under the Endangered Species Act, marine mammals under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So the administration is proposing to move all of those managed and protected species to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. That sounds pretty benign enough because U.S. Fish and Wildlife already manages threatened and endangered species, mainly, your land animals, as well as your non-anadromous freshwater fish species. But this isn't a one-to-one move. It's not just like they're taking all those resources, moving it from one bucket to another. Along with that transfer, the resources would be to manage these species would be decreased. So we're looking at a $45 million cut in funding, as well as a loss of 250 jobs. So think about that for a minute. We're asking the U.S. Fish and Wildlife to absorb species that they've never really managed this capacity before, don't have the expertise and the infrastructure. And we're saying, here, manage these species. Oh, and by the way, you're going to have significant cuts in your resources. So it's definitely not a good way to go about protecting the threatened and endangered species that we all love. Talking about a couple of our bedrock federal laws that have had proposed amendments to them. We'll talk about the Marine Mammal Protection Act in a minute, but first we're going to talk about the Endangered Species Act, that law that's been in place for nearly 50 years, which essentially establishes criteria for listing a species as threatened or endangered, what it takes to remove a species from that list, rulemaking as far as what activities can and can't be done. And then what the federal government is required to do to protect these species. So a pretty, I'm just going to call it what it is, horrible amendment by Congressman Westerman from Arkansas looked to really weaken the Endangered Species Act. So a few of the things that were really kind of focal points for us, one was the shortening comment periods for any rulemaking changes, in some cases as much as 50%, going from 60 days to 30 days as an example. It would have eliminated protections for long-term impacts. So think things like climate change and ocean acidification, which are only going to intensify over time, and kind of laying the foundation on how do we protect those species now for what they're going to see in the future. A big concern of mine personally was this word called harm. So in the Endangered Species Act, and I'm really oversimplifying here, but there's kind of two ways to think about it. There's take, which is the actual removal of an individual from a population that's protected under the ESA. And then there's harm. And harm speaks to protecting the critical habitat that these populations need. So foraging, feeding habitat, breeding, rearing young, that kind of thing. Luckily, there's been no appetite for these amendments in Congress right now. I won't say we're completely out of the woods and, life is merry and we can move on. But I will say right now there's no appetite. It's definitely stalled, including several Republicans who said that they would not vote for this. So there is definitely some good news there. The last thing I wanted to touch on related to the ESA is the Endangered Species Committee, which a lot of us in the industry lovingly refer to as the God Squad. The God Squad is a committee that's established in the Endangered Species Act for the purpose of looking at exemptions and workarounds, if you will, to the ESA that relate to national security. So in the near 50 years since established, the God Squad has met 4 times, and none of those times have been proactive, and none of those times have been to override, undermine, go around the Endangered Species Act. Well, that changed earlier this year when the God Squad convened on our so-called national emergency related to energy development, specifically establishing oil and gas infrastructure in the Gulf of Mexico and how that would impact endangered species like Rice's whales, sea turtles, etc. So the God Squad proactively met and basically just overrode the Endangered Species Act for the purpose of developing the Gulf of Mexico. This meeting took about 15 minutes, so one could argue that the God Squad walked into this meeting with the sole purpose of knowing what they're already going to do. But just to kind of set the table here on how the God Squad might be go from something that most people have never heard of to something that people are actively keeping an eye on. The White House did issue an executive order directing the God Squad to meet quarterly at a minimum to proactively identify obstacles to domestic energy production. So it's taking a very reactive process and making it more proactive. So that's definitely a concern of ours. Lastly, the Marine Mammal Protection Act. So marine mammals, whether they're listed or not, get some sort of protection in the U.S. And that would include things like incidental take, bycatch, what have you. Congressman Begich from Alaska proposed changes that would effectively weaken the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Luckily, there was no traction here because his constituents in Alaska did not support this, did not give him the support that he needed. So if you are from Alaska, good job. We thank you. But again, I won't say we're out of the woods on this, but it's definitely stalled. So sign of good things, I guess. The last thing I want to talk about is the Pacific Salmon Recovery Fund, and under the administration's FY27 NOAA budget, it would be terminated. And this is definitely a problem because if we don't protect these species, if we don't recover them, as my man, the Terminator, might say, they won't be back. Last slide. So before I kind of just turn it over, just want to mention a couple of things here. First, I would invite anybody on this call to scan that QR code that's on the screen. That'll take you to Oceana's petition to tell your members of Congress to protect NOAA and NOAA funding. Again, I welcome everyone here to do that. However, a special call out for anyone in Washington State, I would highly, highly recommend you do this if possible. The reason why is Senator Cantwell is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Committee for Commerce, Science, and Transportation, essentially the Senate committee that kind of oversees what NOAA does, what NOAA doesn't do, that sort of thing. It would be influential in that space. And Senator Murray is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Committee of Appropriations. So basically, how we fund the federal government and cuts, increase funding, that kind of thing. And if you do want to reach out to me and have any questions about what we do in this space, you can email me on the screen there, jlucas@oceana.org. And that is a picture of me looking terrified at Mike the Orca. So that is all I have. And thank you again, everyone. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's great to hear what's happening and what we need to be on the lookout for. I always take every little bit of hope I can when you see that the ESA stuff didn't go through and there's no appetite for that there. And it just goes to show that if we raise our voices, we can make a difference. And it's really coming on all of us to be able to push our legislators to do the things that we want them to do and make some changes. So it's good to see when that actually happens and give us hope that we can continue to do that. So with that, we'll go on to our last presenter, Abby Dalk, and she will hopefully be talking to us more about voting and how it's important and how we can make the changes that we want to see.
Yeah, thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Jeremy. My name is Abby Dalk, and I'm the Advocacy and Policy Coordinator at Save Our Wild Salmon Coalition, and I'm based in Portland, Oregon. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Save Our Wild Salmon, we're a coalition of Northwest and national conservation organizations, recreational and commercial fishing associations, clean energy and orca advocates, businesses and individuals who all share the same goal of restoring healthy and abundant salmon and steelhead to the Columbia Snake River Basin for all the many benefits that salmon and steelhead have for communities across the Northwest, including, of course, the southern residents. And so I was asked to talk a little bit about the importance of voting. In addition to the central theme of Orca Action Month this year being voting, Save Our Wild Salmon is hosting our second Get Out the Vote campaign this year to encourage strong participation in the fall midterm election. And as we've already heard tonight, who we elect into office has profound impacts on salmon and orcas in our lands and waters. And I'm really excited to talk to you soon about ways to get involved with the Get Out the Vote campaign. But I did want to take a moment before I share my screen just to share a few quick reflections. I've only had personally the privilege of participating in 4 federal elections so far in my lifetime. And I have to say that it's sort of become like second nature, kind of this thing that we must do. And while I feel like that is true for me personally, in preparing for this webinar, I was really reminded of the fragility and the privilege of voting. So please bear with me for a second as I kind of nerd out about the Constitution. I was prompted to revisit my pocket Constitution earlier today. And I was just reminded that, elections are written into the Constitution under Article 1, Section 4. Senators and representatives are to be chosen by their respective state legislatures, which was then later changed to popular vote by the 17th Amendment, passed in 1913. The 15th Amendment passed in 1870 to eliminate racial barriers to voting, which was, of course, huge. That the U.S. citizens wouldn't be denied voting on account of race. Then we saw the 19th Amendment passed in 1920 that said that U.S. citizens could not be denied the right to vote based on the account of sex. In the 24th Amendment, we saw the elimination of poll taxes. The 26th Amendment passed in 1971, which gave citizens 18 and older the right to vote. So it's a huge high-level overview of these changes that took place, and there's a lot more story behind these amendments, and I highly encourage you to take some time to dive into the advocacy and the struggle that took place to enact these changes. But to me, this high-level overview of voting shows the power of popular sovereignty, meaning the government that's based on the consent of the governed. And none of these changes to the US Constitution could have occurred without the will of the people. So, in essence, all of that is to say that you and your neighbor and your cousin and your cousin's neighbor all hold the power to uphold our democracy and ensure that we can continue to participate in elections. So, despite this recent voting history, the numbers are kind of telling a different story. And according to Pew Research, the past two midterm elections in the US saw fewer than 50% of eligible voters participate. Less than 50%. For all the struggle for the right to vote, only less than 50%. The midterm elections in 2018, 2020, and 2022 were some of the highest turnout in US midterm elections in decades, which is encouraging. And still in 2020, we saw 66% of voting eligible population turn out to vote in the presidential year, which is just 2/3 of eligible voters. And at that time, it was the highest rate of eligible voter turnout since 1900. So there's kind of this contradiction here. Voting is at the heart of our democracy in the US, and yet these numbers are showing that we often take it for granted. And we're seeing playing out in front of our eyes that democracy is fragile. And so participating in elections is essential for, civil society and justice and reimagining our relationships with ourselves, each other, our neighbors, the world. And we have the right to participate in the creation of laws and policies, as we heard from Tara earlier. And these policies govern our daily lives. So not only is voting a hard-earned right, it's really a civic duty and responsibility to participate in our democracy if we, the kind of collective we, decide to uphold it. So with that, I think I've made my case that voting is quite essential, and I strongly encourage you to vote in the primaries if it hasn't occurred where you live, and it's August 4th in Washington. And of course, in the midterm election this fall on November 3rd. But now I want to invite you to take a step further and ensure that your friends and family vote with you. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen to talk a little bit more about the Get Out the Vote campaign that SOS and our coalition are carrying out this midterm election.
It looks good.
Thank you for confirming that. It's always a little scary to share your screen. So we're launching this Get Out the Vote campaign to encourage people to vote for our homes, lands, waters, salmon, orca, our communities, each other, and in partnership with over 35 organizations. We have developed some beautiful artwork, or we've partnered with artists who have created beautiful artwork to develop posters and voter resources and a pledge to vote to really shift this narrative around we want to see the strong voter turnout. So I'll go to the next slide. These are all our partners. So here is an example of this beautiful artwork to encourage people to vote. You can see on these posters, we're calling for a message of unity for our common home and the species that we share it with. And I do just want to share that Northwest Artists Against Extinction is a program of SOS where we work in collaboration with artists who are lending their artistic talents and skills to speak out for salmon and orca and all the communities that depend on them. So here are two of our posters as part of the Get Out the Vote campaign. And we also have a few more really, really beautiful artworks. And we're looking for volunteers to help us distribute the posters in visible locations across the region. And if you're interested, I'll drop a link in the chat to sign up to volunteer. We have all of the posters. Yeah, here are some of our volunteers from 2024 putting up a different set of artwork posters that were really beautiful for that election. And if you're interested in volunteering, we have a special t-shirt with Sue Kochia's artwork, as you can see there on the screen, to wear when you're out postering. We also have some half sheets with lots of voter information, like checking deadlines, checking your voter registration. And we really hope that you'll join us in encouraging people to get out the vote. I think that's all I have on the slides. Oh, just kidding. There are also some events happening across the region where we invite everyone to come and learn more about Get Out the Vote, and really prepare for the primary in August and also, of course, in November. So highly encourage you to come to some of these events in addition to all the Orca Action Month events. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to talk further. And I just wanted to close by kind of sharing for me personally, at the core of all I do, I feel like I have to hold this hope and interconnectedness, and I think it's something that we all need if we're going to protect our Earth and species from climate change and extinction and mend the world. And I like to think of orca and salmon recovery as this really rich, intricate tapestry of interconnectedness of individuals across the Northwest and the US and across the globe, people like you and me who care about solutions that help us live in harmony with the natural world. And, this tapestry is interwoven and it's complex across many landscapes and points of view across decades and generations, and every kind of tug and pull at the tapestry creates ripples. And I just think that participating in our democracy by voting is a really prime example of how you can create ripples. So thank you for your time. This goes without saying. Please vote early and often. This election will impact our future, the recovery of salmon and orcas, air, lands, waters where we live. And I really thank you all for taking the time to be here today.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abby. It's it's wonderful to hear the passion about somebody for voting, and to just that passion can spread to everybody else, and really the importance of we do have power even if we feel powerless sometimes. Is that power is that voting and telling our legislatures what we want to see. If you do have the link for the volunteering, we had some people asking for that question in the Q&A, so that'd be great to put it in there. And the artwork is amazing. Tara put that in the chat too. I was like, it's gorgeous. And art, I like to do it with science. I'm a scientist, but art is such a powerful way to communicate science and to get people involved. So it's just wonderful seeing that art and science kind of come together. Well, we just have a couple minutes, and I would like to pick out one of the questions we have in the Q&A. And this kind of goes with what we were just talking about with what can we do? This one is for Tara. How can we as community members suggest edits to current bills in the cycle versus just pro and con? Is there a way to maybe cut a cost or increase a fee that aligns with budget shortfalls without being against a good bill as a whole? Is there any way to do that?
Yeah, well, some legislation comes with ideas like fees or built-in things like that, and all of that is assessed in a fiscal note. So, when the budget office is balancing the books for a bill, and they'll work with agency staff, and they'll look at all of those things and see how it balances. So if there is a bill that's like going to pay for itself through whatever process, then that's factored in. But remember, it takes money to kind of set that all up too. So there's lots of details involved. And then as far as like ideas about language in a bill, you can always work directly with your legislator. I mean, all the legislators, that have offices all have staff people that answer the phones, that answer the emails, and work with constituents. You can sign in pro and con. You can sign in to testify for a bill. Some you may or may not get selected to testify, but you certainly can sign in to testify. You can contact the sponsors of the bill. So when you see a bill being sponsored, you see the names, and you can reach out to the actual legislators. If there's any key agencies involved and you have connections there, you could try that avenue as well. Or lobbyists, if you have a lobbyist that there's that avenue as well.
You have that in your pocket. Be good to use that. I think we have time for maybe one more question. Do you have any information about the current state of the Seattle City environmental policies that are apparently pretty much ignoring the plight of the orcas? Apparently there was an article in the Seattle Times 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, is that for me or is that for
anyone? I think anybody, but probably mainly for you.
Yeah, I saw that question and I pulled open the article, and I haven't been done reading it lately, but that is one of the governor's issues too, and a lot of leaders across the West is the homelessness issue. So of course, housing and affordability are all major issues, and they butt up potentially against the goal of increased housing for the houseless and for making affordable housing for the people that are on the brink of being potentially houseless. So it's a real issue, and I think that the environment does have to be factored in, because without trees, without the health of salmon and orca, we're not really the Northwest. So certainly all of that needs to be considered. And I'm sure there will be pushback on policies that are not being proactive in terms of the environment, as you saw, I think, in the article.
Awesome. I think, there's one more question, so we're just going to slip it in. How impactful is legislation for prey availability at the state level, given that the salmon are managed with other states, Canada, tribal co-managers, and like that? It's very complicated, right? We have all these different levels of management and how they all talk. And
Yes, that's very challenging. So a lot of that legislation is based on like some environmental protections and the physical landscape. But I think what you're referring to is harvest. And certainly that is, I don't think I have any harvest legislation on my list, because in fact, the Orca Task Force did not touch harvest, other than saying fully fund the Pacific Salmon Treaty. And the Pacific Salmon Treaty is the whole process on establishing harvest between Canada, Alaska, and the lower 48. So there are very complicated processes involved with, state representation at the Pacific Salmon Commission. Some of those meetings are public, and there's opportunities to participate in those processes. The North of the Falcon is the co-manager process with tribes and the state on setting harvest limits. Those are also often public forums as well. So there's opportunities to learn and participate in that process. And there are a lot of opinions and a lot of controversies and a lot of issues with all of those topics.
Yeah, it's all of this is complicated stuff, but the best that we can do is to get out and talk to each other, listen to each other, and figure out those compromises that lead us all in the right direction. And so,
and give orcas a voice.
Right. Exactly. And make people know that the animals deserve as much of a voice as we do. And so I think that's a great place to end the evening, right? Get out, do what you can, whether it's talking to your neighbors, other people, getting out and voting, getting out and, contacting legislatures and all that. All of that stuff does make a difference. And we need to do it in order to protect these animals and the habitat that we share with them, right? The Salish Sea is for all of us, and we have to do our part to help protect it. So hopefully you got some good information tonight on how to do that in your own lives, and sharing it with others would be great, right? You never know what people don't know. So tell people about what you learned. And so with that, I want to thank our wonderful speakers, and from all of us at Western Washington University, the Salish Sea Institute, and Orca Salmon Alliance, we want to thank you for joining us today. We also want to thank the WW Alumni Office for their partnership, who creates this whole webinar experience for us. The recording of this webinar will be emailed out in the next few days, so please check your email. It should be arriving soon. So have a great evening. Thank you so much for joining us and for caring about the Salish Sea and the orcas that we all love. Thanks.